Hi everyone, welcome to POT 4936, Democracy and Propaganda. I thought I'd make this little video to introduce you to the class, tell you what it's about and some of the topics that we'll be covering. But before I do that, I'll say a few words about myself. I am a PhD candidate in the School of Interdisciplinary and Global Studies at the University of South Florida. The class is a Special Topics Advanced Political Theory course. It's based off of my dissertation, which is on the propaganda and strategic narratives of great power states. So in political science, I have two areas of specialization. One is international relations, and the second is political theory. So before this, I taught INR 2002, Introduction to International Relations. So in this video, what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the course, provide a brief introduction to political theory, and I'll tell you about some of the topics that we'll be covering in the class. I'm very excited about teaching this class, and I hope you're excited to be here. I think it'll be really interesting, and I hope you will get a lot out of it. So if that sounds good, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what kind of class is this, and who should take it? As I said, this is an advanced political theory class. At the University of South Florida, poli-sci majors need 2 theory classes in order to graduate. One of those classes has to be POT 3003, Introduction to Political Theory. This class can count as your second political theory class. The introduction class, POT 3003, is recommended, but it is not required in order for you to take this class. So this class explores the connection between how we think about truth and what kinds of political systems we have. So what does that mean? I'll tell you. If you think about the medieval period, there were only 2 kinds of people who could have access to knowledge: kings and clergy. Most people were illiterate serfs living off of the land, right? So under such a system, there's only one kind of political system that makes any sense, and that's a monarchy. In order for modern democracies to come into being, there had to be a change in how people thought about knowledge and who could access it. In other words, all those illiterate serfs needed to be thought capable of accessing and processing just as much knowledge as anyone else. Boom, modern democracy can be born. So you might be thinking now, as many people have been talking about in recent years, with the rise of conspiracy theories, distrust of news and information, the rejection of science and expertise, maybe all of these things might be threatening democracy in a way we haven't quite thought about fully yet. This class is going to help us think about more fundamentally why those things threaten democracy. After all, how can people rule themselves if they don't have access to a common basis of truth and common facts about the world? So, although it is a theory class, this class is very topical to what's going on in the world today, and it is intended to help us reflect on questions about whether democracy can survive in the age of social media and deep fakes. So, if those are questions you've been thinking about in recent years also, you're in the right place. Okay, so I described this class as being from Plato to postmodernism. And the reason I did that is because what we do, like what you did in your introduction to political theory class, is we sample philosophical texts from very different time periods. If you haven't yet taken the intro to political theory, and even if you have, let's step back and remind ourselves about what political theory is. So most of you in this class are political science majors, not philosophy majors necessarily, but most of you are political science majors. And as you know, political science has 2 parts. It has empirical studies on one hand, and that's the side of political science that most people are familiar with. That's the part that uses statistics or interviews and surveys, asking people why they voted as they did, what values motivate them, that sort of thing. These are kinds of studies that tell us something about what's going on in the political world, right? Well, the other part of political science is the political theory part. So the political theory part is also concerned about what's going on in the world today, but it doesn't stop there. It has this extra part that is more idealistic. It's asking questions such as, what is the best political system for humans to live under in order to maximize human well-being and happiness, stuff like that. So in other words, while the empirical part of political science describes what is happening in the world today, political theory asks what should be happening in the world today, or what are the best, how can we cultivate the kinds of things that we want to happen and discourage or deter the kinds of things that we don't want to happen in order to maximize human well-being and happiness. So those are the two parts of political science. The other thing I want to say is because this class is, from Plato to postmodernism, it's sampling philosophical texts that are centered around the motivating question of the course, which is what is the relationship between truth or knowledge and the kinds of political systems we live under, specifically democracies. What is the relationship between truth and democracy? And so we're going to read political thinkers from both the ancient period and the modern period, and through even to the postmodern period. So, and there's many differences. There are many key differences between how the ancients thought about philosophy and how the modern thinkers think about philosophy. So, by the way, first of all, the modern period, when we're talking about political theory, the modern period begins around 1500. Usually, people talk about it beginning with Machiavelli or Thomas Hobbes. Both of those two people lived within 100 years of each other, right around the same time period, early 1500s. Hobbes was writing 1650, the Leviathan. Those two thinkers thought significantly differently from the preceding thinkers, that we consider it to be a significant shift, the end of the ancient or medieval period and the beginning of the modern period, which either goes till now or at some point we begin a postmodern period, but that's debatable about when, where, and if that has even happened. But the difference, you'll learn in this class, there's a lot of differences between ancient philosophy and modern philosophy. And one of the very important ones for this class is the nature of truth, how they thought about the nature of truth. Ancient thinkers were thinking about truth as absolutes and universal. Like truth is out there somewhere, and we can discover it if we know how to do it. So that's why Plato and Socrates often talk about the job of the philosophers being to discover truth. Modern political thinkers, however, often think of truth as more contextual. It's context dependent, but dependent on a particular time, a particular place, a particular culture. So modern political thinkers tend to reject the ancient view of truth as a universal. Another way that the two theorists differ that we'll encounter in this class is in this. What is the purpose of knowledge? For the ancients, the purpose of knowledge and understanding is for its own sake, right? Humans wanted to understand what is the nature of humanity, what is the nature of God, what is our role in this world, just for the sake of understanding. Sometime around, say, the 1600s, mostly around sort of with John Locke, the shift changes. Locke is one of the first philosophers who's in that modern period who makes a break with previous thinkers. So previous to him, philosophers were trying to figure out, say, rationalist proofs for the existence of God, stuff like that. Locke comes along and says, you know what? We're never going to get there. We cannot know those things. And so, for that reason, we should just focus on what we can know, which is this world, here and now. And the way we can know it is through the science of empiricism, which is the science of things that can come, we can know things through our senses. And we have the development of the scientific method, right? We build a hypothesis, we test that hypothesis, we isolate the variables to the extent that we can, and we test that hypothesis, and then we record the results. This had been a very successful method in the natural sciences. Of course, this was the time of Copernicus and Galileo. They were figuring out many wonderful things about the world that humanity had never encountered before. But another thing that happens is that the purpose of knowledge shifts there. Instead of being knowledge for knowledge's sake, it's knowledge in order to understand something about the world, in order to create something of benefit to human beings. In other words, it's a more utilitarian approach to knowledge. That's one of the key differences between the ancients and the moderns when it comes to thinking about theories of knowledge and how we can know what we know. So that's just a sample of some of the things we're going to get into in this class. In the next slide, I'm going to tell you about more of the specific topics that we're going to cover in the class and give you a rough outline of when we're covering them. Okay, so topics covered in this class in roughly this particular order, barring any hurricanes or major storms that hit the Tampa Bay area and cause us to shut down campus for a week or so. We're roughly going to begin in this order. So we start with the current situation. What are the current debates about the so-called post-truth era? Is that a good description for what we're living in right now? What's the cause behind the rise of populism, the rejection of expertise, rule by the people, right? We don't need those stinking experts anymore. The rise of conspiracy theories, fake news, skepticism of science, all of those things. So we spend the first couple of weeks of class just kind of getting the lay of the ground currently, like what's happening currently. Then we begin to go a little bit into the history of state propaganda, and that takes us back to the period of the First World War. This was the time when many nation states, for the first time, began to institutionalize their communications efforts. So for the first time for the US, we had the Committee on Public Information. Over in England, it was the Office on War Information. These were departments of government that didn't exist before the war. And in many cases, like in the United States, they were created just for the purpose, for the duration of the war, and they were disbanded afterwards. People didn't think that those things were good to have during peacetime. They were just part of the war effort. But what happens at that time is, simultaneously, we're seeing the rise of new communications technologies, such as mass communications. The invention of the radio is the main one. And so what happens is this begins a debate. We also see the rise of the public relations industry is the second major thing. Propaganda, public relations, these two concepts are sort of similar, sort of related. We'll talk about that in the class. And what happens is there begins to be this debate within the United States and probably in other countries as well about what this all means for democracy. Is propaganda good for democracy? Can it help build more democracy? Can it make democracy stronger? Or is there something inherently suspicious and problematic about propaganda that makes it anti-democratic or harmful to democracy? We'll cover arguments on both sides of that debate in this class. So after we do that, then we really get into the meat of the subject matter. We begin to read some political theory. We begin with a French philosopher named Jacques Ellul. We will read Hannah Arendt, and then we will go back to the ancient period. We'll go back, almost 2,500 years, back to Plato, and hear what Socrates has to say about concepts of truth. He doesn't use the word propaganda, of course, but he uses a similar word, similar concept, rhetoric. And we'll see what Socrates sees as the difference between rhetoric and the truth or philosophy. What's the difference between philosophers and rhetoricians, which he called sophists back then. So after Plato, we go into some more history by Sophia Rosenfeld. We read a book called Democracy and Truth. She talks about that transition period in the Middle Ages when the way people thought about truth and who could have access to it began to shift, making it possible for modern democracies to arise. And then finally, we'll have an article that presents a postmodern concept of truth. And we'll see how that differs in some fundamental ways from the moderns and the ancients, but also has some similarities to the ancients as well. We'll see why in the class. So, and finally, the last thing we'll do is we'll take all of these concepts that we've been reading throughout the semester, and our final project is to evaluate a case study, an argument, asking the question, Does the U.S. need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to address the past history of slavery? It's a fascinating argument, and all the concepts of truth that we've talked about so far can be used in deconstructing that argument and understanding, both sides of it. So in your final project, you'll be evaluating that argument using some of the concepts we talked about throughout the semester. Okay, so in the last slide, I'm just going to tell you about 2 books that I want you to buy and a couple other things. Okay, required books and class assignments. Just to give you a brief idea of what we'll be doing in this class, there are 4 types of assignments. The first are discussion post, questions and answers, talking points. These are weekly things that you post to Canvas based on the assigned readings for that week. Very low bar on these. There's no right or wrong answers. I'm mostly interested in hearing what you think. What's your response to the things that we read in that in the readings that we did for that week? Those are always going to be due on Fridays, and you post those in Canvas. The bulk of the assignments the bulk of your grade comes from these next 2 assignments, the in-class assignments, which I abbreviate ICAs, and then the in-class essays. So ICAs are short little assignments that we do at the beginning of every class period that will usually be think of it as kind of a short answer type of question. I just want you to write a paragraph outlining something that the readings talked about, that sort of thing. And you either do these on your own, or sometimes you can work in small groups. I like group work. It helps to get people talking more. So sometimes we will work in our small groups. And then we'll have the 2 in-class essays. So the individual ICAs help prepare you for the in-class essays. And I'll tell you more about those when we get into class. The 4th type of assignment you can also do in your small groups. So it is class presentations. I know students get nervous about that sort of thing, but listen, there's good news. You don't have to do it on your own. You're not going to be standing up there by yourself. You work with your small group. You sign up for which day you want to present. At the beginning of the semester, probably about the 2nd week, we'll do that. We'll pass around the sign-up sheet. So you pick when you want to present. You get together with the other people who pick that week. And you just give us a brief overview of the readings. What were the main points? But also provide us with some talking points and some discussion questions. You're going to kind of lead the discussion for that week. What were the things that most struck you about the points raised in the readings that week? And how do they compare to the points raised in the previous readings? So that's all and these are short, probably about 10 minutes or so, no more than 15 minutes. And they're relatively easy. So those are the main class assignments. And also, like I said, there are just 2 required books. One of them is Plato's Gorgias translation by James H. Nichols. So particular translation, it's the one that's in the bookstore. Don't just buy any old translation of Plato. We all need to have the same particular translation. Trust me, it's much, much easier that way. Oh, and I would prefer you have an actual physical copy of the book. Plato is an ancient text. I don't think it translates well to reading on a device. I'm a big fan of ebooks. I use them all the time. I have so many. And I don't mind if the 2nd book is an ebook. Sophia Rosenfeld's book, Democracy and Truth. It's significantly cheaper than the paper version, because the last time I checked, there was no paperback version. It was a hardcover, and it was $25. So I don't mind if you buy an ebook version. It's like $9 for a Kindle copy of Sophia Rosenfeld's book. That's fine. But I do want you to get a paper copy of Plato, so that we can have the text with us in class, like as a physical thing to be looking at. We'll be, reading sections. It's a dialogue. It's sort of like a play. So it's a conversation that is happening. So both of these are available at the USF bookstore. You can definitely find used copies of at least the Plato book, probably the Sophia Rosenfeld book. Neither one of them are very new editions or anything. Rosenfeld's book, I think, is from 2018. So that's all you need. If you have any questions, feel free to email me anytime, bhow@usf.edu. Or if you're, if you're on the Canvas, you can send me a message through Canvas as well. And the syllabus is on there as well. Please read it before you come to class on the first day. Otherwise, I'll tell you much more information when we get together on Monday. I forget the exact date, but it's at the end of August. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'll see you all there.